2 of the most emotionally tumultuous months of Crystal Jennings' life have passed. In the eye of the storm, anxiety related to her new knowledge of reality seemed to make every second pass with arduous torment. Crystal became unsure of her purpose. She wandered through her thoughts, day in and day out, while waiting to return from mandatory leave from the Homeworld Protection Agency, or HPA, a secret government organization tasked with maintaining peace between our world and a mysterious fourth dimension which is woven through it. Most HPA agents thought they were just a bunch of monster-fighting badasses who were privileged with proof of creatures the general population argued about the existence of. In reality, most of Crystal's colleagues knew very little in comparison to her now. Most agents had no idea about the fourth dimension from which the monsters came, nor had any of them actually seen it, except for Crystal. She was on leave because her former commander had nearly killed her in service of what he viewed as a higher mission. It was supposed to be like a paid vacation, a little pat on the back to say, "Hey, sorry your boss tried to send you off into infinity." But the time away from work tortured Crystal with time to question and wonder. In between fits of depression and rage, Crystal played catch-up on the geopolitical, national, and cultural news she'd missed out on while trapped in the fourth dimension. She only spent a few minutes in there, but years passed while she was gone. She learned the COVID pandemic was over, thank God, but that some brutal conflicts had broken out in Ukraine and Palestine, that multiple international governments had toppled, and that Donald Trump, who had only recently been defeated when she disappeared, had won the White House for a second term. However much the headlines stunned her, none came close in comparison with the truth that we are all just pieces of a larger thing that exists all around us. As shocking as she found most of the news, nothing felt very meaningful anymore. A week before the end of her leave, Crystal received a call on her HPA-issued Nokia brick phone. She recognized the director's number and answered.
"Agent Jennings?"
asked a female voice Crystal barely knew. "Director Vega," she answered. "I wasn't expecting any calls yet."
"I know, and I'm sorry to interrupt you on leave,"
Deanna Vega, the director of the HPA, said. She had treated Crystal with empathy and kindness since the incident with Commander Sean Graham in the Warning Woods. When she said she was sorry, Crystal knew she meant it, and that this call must be crucial.
"I'm worried we're going to need you back in action a little bit sooner than anticipated,"
Jennings said. "Completely fine with me, ma'am. I'm getting stir-crazy just sitting around thinking about everything."
"I can imagine,"
Vega replied.
"I wish there was somebody we could send you to talk to. There's literally no one else who understands what you're going through, though. That is the burden we bear in this work. Well, for now."
"Ma'am, are we getting shut down?" Crystal asked. She'd been following some widespread staffing cuts being implemented by the Trump administration, namely under the discretion of Elon Musk, who had been building electric trucks and Mars rockets when Jennings last heard anything about him. So much had changed in so little time, it made her reel. Director Vega said,
"No, not yet. That's sort of my point in calling, though. We need to shut ourselves down and disappear before any of this new scrutiny reaches us. If we're disclosed, it's not simply defunding and layoffs we'll need to worry about. Know what I mean?"
"Sure," thought Crystal. "People think UFOs are scary. Wait until they learn about the confirmed vampires and demons walking amongst them."
"Good. Well, I know this is a big favor to ask someone who's about to be out of a job, but we have to shut down a few operational sites around the country in order to disappear for good."
Crystal asked. "So that's it? We're just shutting down for good? What about all the fissures? What about everything that comes out of them, and what about what's already here?"
I know,
replied Vega.
"I've tried to come up with a better solution, but the risk of discovery is just too high. If you think tensions in this country and in the world are bad right now, imagine if everyone learned what you know."
Crystal said, "I understand, it's just, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now."
"I've been asking the same question, trust me. But listen, this last mission is something you can do. We have a few sites where we've been able to contain anomalies and study them. Obviously, these need to be terminated before any inquests begin. I'm sending you out to Nebraska, to a place the locals call the Nebraska Barren. We know it as the Hatchery. Right in the middle, there used to be a fissure. It's one of the rare fissures we actually managed to close off. The hatchery is walled so nobody can see in, and our people out there just let everyone believe whatever they want is inside. We've spread rumors that it's a meteor crash site, and the locals ran with that and turned it into aliens. You know how it goes. It's gotta be aliens or Bigfoot, right? If people really knew.
So, I'm supposed to go to this hatchery and what? Tell everyone there to pack it up and go home? I don't understand my role here, ma'am.
My apologies for being so vague, Jennings, but I've said about all I'm comfortable saying over the phone, even on a secure line. We have assets out there that need to be destroyed. I'm going to send you the coordinates so you can be on your way. There are 2 agents and one of our researchers stationed out there already. I just need you to oversee the closure and make sure nobody takes any souvenirs or decides to make their next career a documentarian, okay? I've already chartered a jet to Western Nebraska Regional tomorrow. That'll get you most of the way there. A man named Clem Bunting will collect you there. That's our researcher. He'll get you squared away.
Roger that, Crystal said. I'll start packing. Jennings arrived in Nebraska early the following morning, met by Dr. Clem Bunting as promised. He was tall, dressed like someone from Jurassic Park, and his green eyes contained a sad intensity. Jennings wondered if people saw that look in her own eyes when they looked at her now. She felt an instant connection with him. "Agent Jennings?" Dr. Bunting asked when she deplaned at Western Nebraska Regional. "Please, call me Crystal. You must be Dr. Bunting?" He nodded. "Just Clem is fine. Come on, I'll give you the rundown on the way to the hatchery." Clem drove an older Ford F-250 with a topper over the bed painted army green to match the rest of the truck. Scratches and dents marked its entire body, and one of the taillights looked newer than the other. As they drove, Crystal stayed mostly quiet while Clem spoke. "I've been stationed out here for a little over 4 years. People think we built the wall around the hatchery to keep civilians out, but it's really for containment. At some point in the past 10 years, a fissure opened up underground. It wasn't a very active one and pretty small, but a unique species came out of it. They emerged above ground and started predating upon local wildlife. Some people disappeared around the same time, but we could never confirm whether this species had anything to do with their disappearances or not. Once the HPA became aware of the situation, they sent me out to lead a task force to contain the outbreak and find the source. Since the fissure was underground, it was pretty easy to collapse the earth above to seal it. So, with the fissure blocked, we focused on what to do about the things that already came through. Before your hometown's encounter with UW-12, what you coined the owl, the species in the hatchery was the only one we'd ever observed reproducing in our dimension. Whether intentionally or by some random process, this species adapted multiple spider-like qualities, but genetically, they seem more similar to lizards, if you can believe it. Crystal said, "I'll believe just about anything at this point." Clem laughed. I hear that. Well, in any case, the reptilian traits seem to influence its feeding and reproduction, while its physical attributes are more similar to arachnids. We call them decaracs, because they have 10 legs instead of 8. "That's just what spiders need, more legs," said Crystal. "You're not scared of spiders, are you?" Crystal raised one eyebrow and looked at him. Clem laughed again. "Well, good, because on top of having 10 legs, these things are about the size of a small horse. The main reason we've kept them around for study is their webbing, though. They produce a material that's extraordinarily strong and highly water-resistant. The HPA assigned a weapons specialist from the Army, who you'll meet, to come work with me on it. We thought it might have military applications, ideally for clothing, but unfortunately it's highly flammable. Not exactly something you'd want to cover soldiers going into combat with." We've controlled their population, but we have a very small team. As you can imagine, not many people could be read into this situation. Besides the weapons specialist, Petra, I've got a former Marine named Brian working with me mostly for defense and maintenance. You'll meet them both at the station. They'll probably be more help to you when it's time to dispose of the Decarax than I will, but I'll arm you with all the knowledge you need. Clem's face pinched slightly, and he turned to look directly at her. Crystal, I'm not sure how much Director Vega told you, but this won't be an easy chore. I'm guessing she assigned you because she thinks you're highly capable. He lingered for her response. Crystal replied, I can't really speak to her logic, but I've handled my fair share of hairy situations. Good, said Clem. I was worried she'd be in such a hurry to shut everything down that we'd just get some random field agent. When she told me you'd been to the other side, I'd love to hear more about that. After we've cleaned up here, said Crystal. What's your plan for after? Asked Clem. I mean, not just after we've finished up in the hatchery. What are you going to do post-HPA? Crystal shrugged. I'm open to suggestions. Clem drove Crystal to a nondescript gray square building nestled back in thick trees. She met with the 2 other HPA agents who would join them in their sci-fi pest control mission. Brian Sinclair, the former Marine who fit every Hollywood portrayal, shook Crystal's hand firmly, squeezing longer than necessary. Crystal worried he might be a little confused or upset about who was supposed to be in charge. Actually, meeting Brian and his colleague Petra Cole, who also appeared more than capable of running the mission and possessed far deeper knowledge of the Decarax than her, made Crystal question the wisdom in placing herself in command. Well, Crystal began, seated at the head of a rectangular table. Clem was still digging through a file cabinet. Before we get started, why don't you all paint me a picture of what it looks like in there? How many of these things are there? What are our advantages, disadvantages, that sort of thing? Clem came to the table holding a manila folder, which he handed to Crystal. Petra leaned forward and said, Our civilian security team is stationed along the roads to make sure nobody comes near. People typically stay away, but it would be just our luck if somebody tried breaking in again today. Again? Crystal asked, opening the folder as she spoke. Printed 8.5 by 11 photos spilled onto the table, giving her her first glimpse of a Decarax. She almost missed what Petra said next. Yeah, we had a breach a few years back. The guard who pursued the trespasser got killed. He's still locked up, the trespasser, and we made sure he got stuck with a manslaughter charge to keep him in for a while. So these things are hostile to humans? Crystal asked. She studied the top photo, which depicted a creature similar to a daddy longlegs in that it had one oval-shaped body segment, but 10 sturdy legs sprouted from its sides. It didn't appear to have any eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. Yeah, you don't want to get too close to him, Brian answered. Clem said, We've already worked out a strategy to take out a significant portion of the population inside the hatchery non-violently. It'll also provide us a distraction while we destroy the eggs. Okay, Crystal said absently as she flipped to the next photo. She figured out where the Decarax's mouth was. This photo showed one, apparently dead, flipped on its back with its legs curled in. In the center of its underside, a circular pit lined with spiraling rows of thin, pointed teeth gaped. She looked up suddenly, asking, Wait, eggs? Yes, replied Clem. Remember I mentioned they reproduce similarly to reptiles? This is lucky for us because if they laid as many eggs as spiders, this operation would have been impossible to maintain. They only lay 3 eggs each about every 6 months, not all of which hatch. This rate only barely outpaces their natural death cycle. What's strange is they seem to reproduce asexually, as we've only observed one sex amongst them, and have never observed any mating procedure between them. So even after we destroy the eggs, we have to be positive we eliminate the entire live population. Petra added. Got it, Crystal replied. She flipped to the next photo, a shot of 4 Decaracs crouched on top of a dead cow. Brian smirked at the look of disgust which involuntarily wrenched her face and said, Doctor, would you like to explain how these things eat? Clem cleared his throat. Yes, their feeding will play a critical part in our extermination plan. Crystal said, I don't know if I want to hear this, but go for it. Clem reached for the last photo she discarded, the one showing the creature's mouth. So, this cavity serves every one of the Decarac's bodily functions. It spreads its webs, which I believe double as its waste product, and lays its eggs through it. It also, obviously, serves as its mouth. The Decarac can prolapse this cavity, turning it into a cone with all those teeth sticking out. When it feeds, it tears into its prey with the cone, shreds the meat, which sticks to the teeth, then it retracts the cone to swallow. This inverted mouth can punch a hole right through a human, which we learned during the situation Petra just mentioned. However, with larger prey, it will only take out 3 or 4 chunks, then move aside for the next creature to feed. They're sort of polite in that regard. Man, you guys must have been pretty positive these things wouldn't get out, huh? Crystal asked. When we take you to the hatchery, you'll see why, Petra explained. We've got a 7-foot wall with only one entrance and nets attached to posts that go up over the trees. Nets? Crystal scoffed. After the break-in, we replaced them with an electrified mesh, said Brian. I'm not a big fan either, but we haven't been able to study any other paranormal species while it's alive, Clem cut in. These are mutants we were fortunate to contain before they made it into the outside world. We need to know as much as possible in the unfortunate chance that more could appear somewhere else. Wouldn't you agree? Crystal nodded slowly as she picked up the last photo, which depicted 6 Decaracs perched in trees and surrounded by a thick green web. So, you mentioned a plan? Clem said. Petra? Petra stood. Twice a week we deliver a large animal, usually an old dairy cow or a sick horse, to the center of the hatchery in a trailer. A local livestock vet helps us source them. We've arranged to pick up 3 animals this afternoon, and once they're here, we'll load them up and take them in. We're going to dust their coats with cyanide powder. We don't know if it'll be as lethal to the spiders as it is to us, but it might take out at least the first wave before we have to fire a shot. There's 17 total, so as long as the poison takes out around 10 or so, we'll have a fighting chance to clear the rest. Just make sure you don't touch the livestock or... Well, I'd recommend just letting me and Brian handle them. Usually the Decaracs take turns feeding, like Clem said, but with 3 animals out there, we're hoping the majority will come down into the middle to eat at once. While they're occupied, you and Clem can go destroy the eggs. We'll wait a little while for the poison to kick in, or at least for them to get full and slow. Then we'll pick off as many as we can, and if we get overrun, we'll take another stab at it tomorrow. After a thoughtful pause, Crystal said, I like it. If we cut off their reproduction, we don't have to rush. Exactly, replied Clem. Now, if everyone understands their roles, I'll get you equipped while Brian and Petra go get the animals. Armed with M4 rifles loaded with incendiary rounds, the team loaded into Clem's pickup truck with a horse trailer hitched to the back. Pro tip, Brian said as Clem drove them toward the circular concrete wall surrounding the hatchery. Aim for the top half of their bodies. That's where their web sacs are. They'll burst into flames. That's why we're using incendiaries, Petra added. Noted, replied Crystal. So, let's go over this one more time. When we stop in the middle, we all get out except Clem. Brian, you'll cover Petra and I. I'll unhitch the trailer, and Petra will let the animals out. We all get back into the truck, and Clem drives us to the tree line. We'll leave you 2 the truck and go smash the eggs. Are we sure there's only one nest? Clem answered. In all the years, they've only ever laid eggs in one place. Yes. It's almost exactly opposite the gate. Crystal said. Got it. Well, Brian and Petra, that means if you start losing any ground, and I mean any ground whatsoever, you need to bail and come pick us up. Clem and I are relying on you to get us out of there. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear," Brian replied, smirking. Crystal rolled her eyes. She decided she did not dislike Brian, however, she thought it best not to let him know just yet. Maybe once they had a successful mission behind them, she would buy them all around at the local pub and they could be friends for a few hours before they all had to figure out what the hell to do next. "You sure you don't want a gun?" she asked Clem. Petra had offered him one back at the station, but he'd turned it down. Clem said, "Trust me, I'm useless with weapons. Besides, if I carry your hammer for you, you can keep us covered on our way to the nest." "You don't want my 9 at least?" asked Petra. "I put incendiaries in it too." Brian said, "Come on, Clem, imagine one of those things coming down on top of you and you've got nothing but a sledgehammer. Bet you'll wish you could just fire one bullet up into its nasty mouth, huh? Watch it pop like a firework." "Well, if you two handle your job, I shouldn't have to worry about that, right?" Clem jabbed. "Clem," Crystal cooed, her voice heavy with insistence. "All right, fine, give it to me." Petra unstrapped her thigh holster and handed it to Crystal with her 9mm pistol locked in it. They reached the gate, thick steel doors which reminded Crystal once more of Jurassic Park. Brian got out and used a key to open the keypad, then entered the code 091622. The doors split apart. After Brian got back in and shut the door, they rolled through the gate. Crystal had tried to ignore the sounds made by the 2 cows and the horse in the trailer for the short drive into the hatchery, but now she found their incessant pleas impossible to drown out. She knew the others were probably numb to the disturbing sacrifice required since they had conducted the feedings multiple times per week, so she tried not to display her discomfort. Somehow, Petra noticed, though. "They're dead anyway," she told Crystal. "They're all sick and need to be put down. Trust me, they'll go out quickly. The Decaracs don't waste time." "Comforting," replied Crystal. They drove through the outer ring of trees and entered the wide-open center of the hatchery, the part which led locals to refer to it as the Barren. Clem pointed to the opposite tree line about 1,000 feet straight ahead. "That's where the nest is. We'll stop at the midway point to drop off the bait." "Radio check," Petra spoke into her lapel mic. Brian adjusted his earpiece and said,
"Loud and clear,"
into his own microphone. "They're really out there?" Crystal asked as the truck slowed to a stop in the center of the clearing. She searched the treetops for spidery legs, but could find no sign of the Decaracs besides the layer of dense webs binding all the trees together. "Oh, they're out there," Brian replied, also staring out his window at the trees. "Ready?" asked Clem. Crystal looked back at the others and said, "We're good. Everyone, move." 3 cab doors flew open simultaneously. Clem remained in the truck, prepared for a quick getaway at the first sign of something amiss, but the team executed Phase 1 beautifully. The trailer rocked and jumped with the nervous movements of the bait inside. Brian whispered that he spotted the first spiders creeping out as Crystal opened the latch on the trailer hitch. Crystal remained focused on her task. She had a feeling she would have her chance to see a Decarac soon enough. "It's off," she alerted Petra. Brian whispered, "All right, I'll cover Petra. You get back in the truck." Crystal shot him a look to remind him who was in charge, but did as he said. It was the plan, after all. She heard the trailer door bang on the ground, followed by clattering hooves. She wasted no time getting in and shutting her door. "Did you see any?" Clem asked, looking over his shoulder to check on the others. Crystal said, "Brian did." Clem turned back to her. "They're masters at hiding. Never drop your guard because you don't see any nearby. The livestock should draw them all into the center, but just keep your head on a swivel." "Okay, that's it, let's go," Petra said as she jumped up into the truck. Clem put it in drive after Brian climbed into the covered bed. When ready, he punched the roof of the topper twice, and like a horse spurred into action, the truck rumbled forward. Crystal's palm felt sweaty on her rifle grip. She looked down to safely rest her gun against her leg to wipe the sweat away. She looked up. At the same moment, a swift, dark shape jumped in front of them. "Watch!" Before she could yell out, the pickup slammed into the assailing Deckerack, jolting them all forward. Brian slammed against the rear window as the spider rolled over the topper. Clem made a quick steering correction and punched the gas even harder. Turning in her seat, Crystal watched for the spider to hit the ground behind them, but it never appeared. "It's still on us," she warned, keeping her voice steady and calm as she was trained. Her internal voice verged on panic. "It's too early for this mission to go to hell. Come on." Clem picked up on her anxiety despite her measured tone. He told her, "Brian can handle it," and kept his eyes straight ahead. The spider thumped around on the roof, struggling for purchase. Webbing splattered on the top right portion of the windshield, directly in front of Crystal. "Oh, we can't have that," said Petra. She told Crystal, "Hold me down." To Crystal's horror, Petra rolled her window down and climbed halfway out. As she requested, Crystal reached back and grabbed a hold of one of Petra's boots to give her an anchor. Slipping her gun through the window, aiming it upwards, Petra yelled, "Hey!" A rattling hiss responded to her, and she replied with 2 rapid shots. A small explosion rocked the truck, and the spider tumbled off, falling just outside Crystal's side window, a tall flame shooting from its open mouth in the middle of its upturned body. Crystal tugged Petra's boot to pull her back inside, and not a second too soon. With a shriek, a second spider lunged, having charged at them while they were all focused on the one on the roof. This time, Brian had a clear shot through the topper's sliding window. His first 2 rounds clipped the creature's legs, making it stumble. It rocked backward to target them with its web, and Brian fired an incendiary round directly into its mouth. Enough force exploded out of it to launch the Deckerack a few feet into the air before it too crashed to the ground, shriveled and smoldering. "That's 2, Brian's tinny voice rang through the rear window. "Okay, Crystal, do you see those trees over there to the right?" Clem asked, pointing at an angle through the windshield. "That's where we're going. That's the nest. Get ready." "Brian, grab the hammers," Crystal called back. Brian, now watching through the rear again, signaled back a thumbs up. While looking behind her, Crystal saw the emerging horde beginning to converge on the helpless livestock they'd left behind. Clem didn't let off the gas until they reached the tree line, where he quickly stomped the brake. Fortunately, Brian was ready. They all climbed out. Petra immediately moved back to cover Brian as he brought the 2 sledgehammers to Crystal and Clem. Over his shoulder, Crystal watched the horrific scene in the middle of the clearing. Near a dozen giant spiders had converged on the poisoned feast in the clearing. Only one of the cows still cried miserably beneath them. The spiders clacked and chittered as they fought for room on top of the fallen animals. When 2 of them pushed one off the top of the horse, Crystal saw the nauseating mouth cone Clem had described at the station. It protruded roughly 2 feet out of the belly of the Deckerack, coated in needle-like teeth all the way around. When it retracted, the teeth all converged upon each other. Crystal imagined how any flesh caught on those teeth would be shredded like ground beef on the way in. So efficient. So revolting. "Let's hurry," Clem said, gripping his hammer. "Watch yourselves," Petra warned. "Looks like we're still missing 3. Clem led Crystal in a sprint toward the nest. Crystal held her hammer in her left hand and kept her right on the rifle grip. Beneath the trees, she realized just how dangerous their role would be. Intersecting layers of web wove between every branch, creating a thick canopy through which they stood little chance of spotting a stalking creature before it came out to attack. She wished she had assigned one of the others to accompany them so one person could be on guard the whole time they were smashing the eggs. But when she looked back at the feasting horde, she understood why that could not be. Already 5 spiders had abandoned the dead animals to pursue the truck, behind which Brian and Petra crouched in firing positions. "Here they are," Clem said. Crystal spared a glance away from the trees to get her first look at the eggs. They shared the same green color as the webs above and were about the size of slightly elongated bowling balls. Each egg lay in its own bed of webbing, When she stepped nearer to one, she noticed its shell was only semi-opaque. Through the shell, which looked somewhat gelatinous up close, she could see a black shape moving. Periodically, an appendage would separate from the center mass to prod. "They're starting to drop," Petra announced through the radio. Crystal looked back toward the feasting horde and watched one Decorac slip limply from on top of a cow, roll onto its back, and curl its legs in. The cyanide was actually working. She returned her attention to the eggs. Up to that point, she had pictured smashing them like chicken eggs. Up close, they looked soft and slimy, and she hated that she could see the baby Decorac inside each one. Even though she knew what these infant creatures would become, in less than 3 days according to Clem, the thought of bringing a sledgehammer down on one made her queasy. Luckily, Clem appeared to have no such qualms, or if he did, he brushed them aside more readily than her. With a nose-curling squelch, he smashed the egg nearest to him. It popped audibly. Half of the baby Decorac inside sprawled out at his feet in a pool of viscous liquid. "Your turn," Clem said, his voice gurgling up as if riding a suppressed wave of vomit. Crystal swung her gun behind her and swung her hammer down. She smashed through the shell and flattened the creature inside. 2 of its legs unfolded onto her boots. She shivered. No time to waste, though. She heard a gunshot from near the truck and turned to check on the other half of her team. Brian and Petra looked calm, leaning against the truck, taking careful aim at the now approaching cluster of drunken spiders. Some, it seemed, had not gotten a full taste of their poisoned meal. They lumbered toward the parked truck, roughly 7 in all, including the one now smoking from Petra's shot. Clem smashed another egg and quickly followed up with a third. Not wanting to be outpaced, Crystal joined in. She thought about the shower she would be taking the minute they returned to the station to distract her from her disgusting and bizarrely saddening task. These things didn't ask to be trapped here, she caught herself thinking as she swung the hammer down on the last egg. She wondered for the first time if, perhaps, the HPA had overstepped its bounds with this operation. How exactly were they protecting the homeworld by keeping these things around for so long? In all those years, what exactly had they learned? "Hey, did you get this one?" Clem asked. Crystal looked between his legs and saw a broken egg. This one looked crusty, unlike the freshly smashed ones. The desiccated remnants of many eggs lay strewn across the ground, but the one in front of Clem didn't look as old as those. Its broken shell was still pliable, and there was no dead baby Decorac near it. "Wasn't me," Crystal answered. Clem swore. Shots continued to ring out behind them, most followed by sizzling and screeching from their targets. But the giant spiders were closing in. "I'm gonna go help them out," Crystal said, ignoring the hatched egg for the moment. So what if a mini Decorac was running around in the trees? They could find it after they killed the big ones. Crystal shouldered her rifle, aiming as she shuffled toward Brian and Petra. Petra hit the target in Crystal's sights first, but the incendiary missed the web sack inside. The Decorac posed to lunge. Crystal aimed high. The moment the spider sprang into the air, she pulled the trigger, hitting it dead in its center mass. Fire blew out of its mouth like a rocket launching as it screamed and collapsed within 50 feet of the truck. "How many are left?" Crystal asked Petra as she joined her side, kneeling into a secure shooting position. "Hard to count while they're still moving around," Petra answered. Brian called over, "By my count, we're still short 3. Clem's urgent voice was almost covered by the next round of gunfire, but Crystal just barely heard him shout, "Hey, watch out!" She saw him running towards them, pointing above their heads. Rolling onto her side, Crystal aimed into the tree, but her barrel was a few feet off. The spider Clem tried to warn them about was above Brian, not her. It had climbed out on a limb to drop directly on top of him. Though difficult to tell for certain amid the chaos, Crystal thought it was the biggest Decorac she'd seen yet. Smaller shots rang out from the pistol Petra gave Clem. He tried to take out the massive Decorac, but he only managed to knock it out of the tree. "Brian!" Petra screamed as he disappeared beneath a cluster of furry limbs. Petra was closer and moved to help Brian, so Crystal returned her attention to the rushing spiders. 2 remained. With a renewed clarity instilled by the danger happening a few feet away, she dispatched the last 2 spiders with 1 shot each and turned away before they finished burning. At the last second, Brian had managed to wedge himself beneath the truck to partially shield himself from the falling Decarac. While this protected him from immediate consumption, he could not get a good angle to shoot from. Petra tried to kill it, but this Decarac, apparently the oldest and wisest in the hatchery, positioned itself behind the truck bed to avoid being hit. Her rounds exploded against the side of the truck, nearly blowing the tire. "Careful!" Crystal shouted. She tried to move around the opposite side of the truck to hit the spider from that angle, but when she got around the front bumper, it was already gone. She heard Petra scream out of sight. Hurrying back around the truck again, Crystal found Petra coated in webbing, the Decarac's mouth still gaping open. Without thinking, both women fired into its hideous maw, launching the spider back from the explosion which blew apart its mouth. The web it launched at Petra had also coated her gun, however, and the moment she fired, she went up in flames. Screaming in agony, Petra tossed her gun to the ground before throwing herself down and rolling to extinguish the flames. Brian crawled out from the truck, ripping off his shooting gloves and beating at his burning comrade with them. Crystal did the same. Clem, given a few extra seconds to think by his distance, ran to the truck's cab and grabbed a small fire extinguisher from beneath the front seat. "Get back!" he yelled. Crystal and Brian fell away to let him spray Petra down. Already most of her clothes had been burned away, melting onto her in some places. She remained alive, still conscious, but incoherent with pain. Crystal ordered a retreat. She told Clem to help Brian get Petra into the truck while she guarded them. They were still missing 2 Decaracs, plus the unaccounted-for baby out there somewhere. But they could deal with those later. Petra needed immediate aid if she was going to make it. They'd been so close to the end, so near mission accomplished. How could I let this happen? With Petra loaded into the back seat, Clem took the wheel again. Brian climbed into the back seat with Petra while Crystal got into the passenger seat. She rolled her window down and stuck her gun out to cover their retreat as Clem sped them toward the gate. One of the remaining Decaracs jumped down from the trees to pursue them. Crystal fired multiple rounds, but the truck was moving too quickly and bouncing too much to give her a clean shot. The spider stumbled when one of her rounds hit its legs, but it retreated back to the trees before she could kill it. "We'll deal with it later," she thought. "I'll come back and finish this myself if I have to." "What the hell?" Brian sputtered from the back seat after they made it through the gate to safety. Crystal pulled her gun inside and looked at him. He was examining his own leg, coated in blood. "Did it get you too?" she asked. "No, I was under the truck," Brian replied. "Must have cut myself on something while I was getting out. I didn't notice until just now." The back of his calf had been torn open. The wound didn't look life-threatening, but it bled profusely. "There's a tourniquet under my seat," Clem said. Brian said, "I don't know if it's that." "Put it on just in case," Crystal interrupted. She asked Clem, "How far is it to the hospital? We need to get Petra help ASAP." "Closest hospital is about 40 miles from here," Clem grimaced. Suppressing panic, Crystal said, "That's not going to work. What kind of supplies do you have at the station?" "Not enough to treat her," Clem replied. "But could we lifeline her?" Brian asked. "What about the vet?" "As in veterinarian?" Crystal spat. "No, it's a good idea," said Clem. "We have that connection with the livestock vet nearby who sources the animals we feed the Decaracs. His clinic is about 3 miles away. He won't be able to save her, but he can at least buy her some time while we wait for a life flight." Crystal looked at Petra writhing in agony behind her. "Okay, go." Driving through rural Nebraska reminded Crystal of her home in Prouty, Indiana, minus the trees. It felt just as empty. In Prouty, she found the isolation comforting. Far from the troubles of more populated areas, she'd served a community-oriented role as a police officer. She rarely felt threatened unless someone from out of town decided to speed past her on the night shift. The lonely countryside had felt safe, at least until the owl came to town. But she'd laid that particular demon to rest in the Warning Woods when she'd been forced to overcome her lingering fear of the owl and the supernatural horror it represented in order to escape a fissure between Earth and the fourth dimension. In her current situation, the isolation of rural Nebraska felt like a death sentence. For Petra, yes, but also for her own newly reacquired self-confidence. It was bad enough that someone had been hurt on her mission, under her leadership, but if Petra succumbed to her injuries, Crystal thought she might rather face the owl again than face the darkness which would follow such a failure. "It's here," Clem announced, pulling Crystal out of her own head. Petra had stopped moaning, which presented as much anxiety as relief. The veterinary clinic was just a converted trailer home next to a large metal shed with an old barn in the back. Clem gave the horn 2 long honks as they rolled up the gravel driveway. By the time they stopped, a hardy old veterinarian had already appeared through the shed's side door. "Dr. Bunting?" he yelled, clearly recognizing an urgent situation. He asked, "Something wrong with one of those? We need treatment for severe burns, Sam," Clem interrupted, speaking rapidly. "Whatever you've got, we need it. We already called Life Flight." The vet, Sam, said, "Life Flight? Is someone hurt?" Brian jumped out. Crystal ran around the truck to help him pull Petra out as gently as possible. Sam muttered, "Oh, sweet Jesus." He noticed the guns propped up in the cab. "What is this, Clem? I always knew something was up with you taking all them animals, but what exactly—" "We don't have time to explain right now. Go get anything you have on hand for Burns. We need to keep her alive until the chopper comes. Hurry!" Sam obeyed. Crystal and Brian carried Petra toward the shed, but Sam reappeared in the doorway and yelled, "No, take her to the trailer. There's an exam table in there. It's for dogs and cats usually, but... oh God." He disappeared inside again. In the trailer, Clem guided the others toward the exam table Sam mentioned, then helped them set her down carefully. He started examining her wounds more closely, continuously shaking his head. "What are her chances?" Crystal asked. "Be straight." Clem looked her in the eyes. "I'm not that kind of doctor, Crystal. She'll be all right," Brian said. "She's tough. Too tough to go out like this." "Listen," said Clem. "There's nothing you two can do for her now. Sam and I will take care of her, and the helicopter should get here in half an hour or so. Agent Jennings, you have a mission to finish. Until every one of those damn Decarax is burned up, this could happen to somebody else. Go. Finish the job." "You sure you don't want us to wait until Life Flight gets here?" Crystal asked. She didn't want to leave Petra's side. Clem said, "I'll call you when she's off the ground. Just take the truck and get out of here."